Winter draped itself across Pine Hollow like an old unbroken hymn, its quiet notes settling on rooftops, on cattle fences, on the lonely cabin perched at the farthest edge of the valley. In that cabin lived Karen Whitford, a woman of 26 winters, whose beauty had gone unnoticed not because it was faint, but because it was the sort that did not demand to be seen. It lived in the softness around her eyes, in the gentle slope of her shoulders, in the quiet dignity she carried like a lantern no one realized was lit. She had lived alone for years, long enough that the walls of her home had memorized her routines, long enough that silence had learned to curl itself around her like a familiar shawl. Loneliness, too, had become a kind of companion, the sort that never left and never spoke, but sat in the corner and watched her every movement. Her mornings began with the brittle sound of frost breaking beneath her boots. She stepped into the pale dawn, breath rising in thin white clouds as she shoveled snow from her porch, the cold biting at her fingers even through wool gloves. She kept an old green shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Her mother's shawl, one of the last things she owned that reminded her she was once loved. When the wind cut sharp across the valley, she pulled it tighter and whispered small promises to herself. That she would endure, that she would not let the world see how thin her strength had become. She had grown accustomed to surviving in pieces, mending herself with stubbornness when warmth was scarce. In town, people spoke of her with the kind of curiosity that grows when a soul refuses to collapse in the ways people expect. They called her the quiet hill woman, the girl who never asked for help, the one who walked alone through snowstorms with her chin lifted as if defying the sky to break her. They wondered how she managed to keep the ranch running without family, without friends, without a man beside her. Some admired her. Some pitied her. Some judged her for the solitude she never chose but learned to inhabit. And though they whispered, she said nothing. She simply carried her groceries home in silence, leaving behind only a faint impression of resilience pressed into the snow. The last man who had visited her doorstep was Elias Mercer, the polished storekeeper whose charm folded easily into cruelty when he believed no one would notice. He had once offered her company, a future built on convenience rather than affection. But when he realized she wanted more than a life lived behind his counter, he turned cold. He told her, with a smile too sweet to be kind, that a woman like her was better off alone, that some hearts were simply made for silence. His rejection lingered in her as winter lingers in the bones, not enough to break her, but enough to remind her what hurt felt like. Since that day, she had kept her emotions locked away the way one seals a door during a storm, letting no one in, letting nothing out. This winter was harsher than any she remembered. Snow piled high against the cabin walls, the wind howled with a low, mournful voice, and every night felt longer than the one before it. Food dwindled. Firewood dwindled. Her hope, too, dimmed at the edges like a lantern running low on oil. Yet she refused to complain. Hardship was an old visitor. She knew its footsteps. She knew how to endure it. She knew how to let it pass through her life without uprooting her spirit entirely. Still, the cold carved deeper this year. It stole her breath when she walked outside. It crept beneath blankets and beneath skin. It made her feel smaller than she had ever felt, small enough that the world barely noticed she existed. But even in that shrinking, she held her ground. She shoveled snow. She lit fires. She whispered her mother's old prayers into the palms of her hands before rubbing warmth into her fingers. She did not crumble. She simply survived one breath at a time. And then, one morning, everything changed. The day began with a strange heaviness in the air, the kind that comes before a storm. Snowflakes drifted thick and slow, as if the sky itself were weary. Karen stood by the window, watching the wind push at the trees, when she heard it, a deep, deliberate thud outside her cabin. Not the scurry of an animal. Not the crack of snow sliding from the roof. Something heavier. Something certain. Her heartbeat quickened, but not from fear. The sound felt too intentional for danger, too grounded for chaos. She stepped to the door, fingers trembling slightly as she lifted the latch. When she opened it, the breath she meant to release caught sharp in her throat. A man stood there. Not a neighbor, not someone from town, but a towering Apache warrior whose presence seemed carved from the very earth he stood on. Broad shoulders glistened with melting snow. Long black hair swept across his chest in the restless wind. His skin glowed with warmth despite the bitter cold. His dark eyes held quiet depth, a restrained strength, a stillness that felt older than the land itself. He did not speak. He simply looked at her, not with judgment, not with pity, but with a calm recognition that felt impossibly tender. At his feet lay a bundle wrapped in deerskin. Karen swallowed, unable to form words. The world felt suddenly too loud, too bright, too unreal. The wind hushed around them, as if waiting for something sacred to unfold. The man gave a small nod, respectful and unhurried, then turned and walked away through the heavy snowfall. No explanation. No name. Only the soft crunch of snow beneath his steps. She bent down, hands trembling, and lifted the bundle. Inside she found dried meat, herbs, and a hand-carved wooden pendant shaped like a small winter bird in flight. Smooth, delicate, impossibly gentle. Her breath trembled as the truth settled over her like warm light. Someone had seen her. Someone had cared enough to help. And far beyond her porch, the giant Apache walked into the storm without looking back, unaware that his single act of kindness had just shifted the course of her winter, and perhaps her life, in ways she could not yet understand. For 3 long days after the giant Apache left the bundle on her porch, Karen told herself not to expect him again. Hope, she had learned, was a dangerous warmth, bright enough to melt ice, yet sharp enough to burn when it disappeared. She tried to forget the sight of him standing in the snow, that steady, quiet presence like a mountain that had stepped briefly into her life. She told herself it meant nothing. A passing kindness. A gesture of culture or custom. Not a promise. Not a thread meant to tie itself to her lonely existence. But the human heart moves with its own wild logic, and hers stirred in ways she could not control. Each morning, she opened her door a little too quickly, pretending she merely wanted to breathe the cold air, though her gaze always drifted to the place where his footprints had once been. When she gathered water from the barrel, she imagined she might see him cresting the hill. When she chopped wood, she wondered if he had noticed she struggled. Every quiet hour of her day became a place to store unspoken questions. The hunger that pressed at her cupboards grew sharper, but the hunger she felt for understanding, for connection, was sharper still. Winter was cruel, yes, but loneliness was the harsher storm. She had lived through both, yet now she found herself bracing for a storm she had never faced before. The discomfort of being seen after so many years of invisibility. On the 4th morning, she opened her door to find him standing there again. Dakota, though she still did not yet know his name. Snow clung to his shoulders like silver dust. His breath rose in slow clouds. He carried no bundle this time, only a stack of chopped wood in his bare arms, as if winter itself feared to touch him. He set the wood down beside her door without a word. Karen stepped onto the porch, boots sinking into powder-soft snow. Her voice felt fragile, but she forced it into the cold air. "You don't have to do this." He lifted his gaze to hers, and she'd never seen eyes hold that kind of steadiness. His reply came low and simple, as though spoken from the deep center of the earth. "Winter is cruel. You should not face it alone." She felt something in her chest tremble. For years, she had been the only one speaking to her pain. Now someone else acknowledged it, not with pity, but with the quiet certainty of a man who understood survival. She thanked him softly. He nodded, stepped back, and disappeared down the snowy path, his footsteps deep and sure. The visits continued, each one carving a small, warm hollow in the cold landscape of her days. He would arrive with herbs, dried fruit, a repaired tool, a blanket stitched at the edges with patient hands. He never overstayed. Never entered. Never pressed for conversation. He simply helped as though the earth had commanded him to do so. And each time, Karen found herself thawing a little more beneath the weight of his quiet attention. The townsfolk eventually noticed the pattern. Mrs. Alder, sharp-eyed as a winter hawk, caught sight of him leaving Karen's path one morning. By noon, Pine Hollow hummed with murmurs. They said he visited too often. They said he must be after something. They said a woman alone should be careful. Elias Mercer, hearing these rumors, felt a flash of possessive irritation he had no right to feel. He had turned Karen away, yet now her growing strength unsettled him. Men like Elias thrived when others remained small. Karen felt the whispers like cold needles against her skin. Yet each time Dakota returned, all noise from the town faded. His silence was not emptiness but presence. Without speaking, he told her she was worth showing up for. Worth carrying wood for. Worth the long walk from the distant ridge where his people camped. She wondered if he understood what these moments meant to her. She wondered if he felt the same quiet shift inside himself. One afternoon, a windstorm roared across the valley, tearing branches loose and hurling snow in swirling sheets. Karen struggled to secure a loose shutter when she heard pounding, not from the wind, but from something heavy striking the side of her cabin. She rushed to the door, pulling it open against the screaming gusts. Dakota stood there, frost on his hair, his arms wrapped tightly around a heavy sack nearly as tall as she was. He pushed his way inside without waiting for permission, not out of boldness, but because the storm would not allow hesitation. Once the door shut, he set the sack on her floor and stepped back, snow melting down his shoulders in trembling rivulets. Karen lit a lantern, its warm glow spreading softly across the walls. In that flickering light, Dakota looked less like a warrior and more like something carved for the purpose of protection. She offered him a seat, unsure if he would accept. For a moment he hesitated, as though unused to being invited into quiet spaces. Then he sat, letting the heat seep slowly back into his hands. The storm raged outside, but inside, a different kind of calm took shape. They didn't speak at first. Silence hung between them, not heavy but tender, like the soft pause between two verses of a familiar hymn. Karen saw his gaze drift to the small green shawl around her shoulders. He studied it with a gentleness she could feel across the room. "Your mother's?" His question vibrated low, warm as embers. She nodded. "It's all I have left of her." Dakota reached into the sack and pulled out something small. A wooden carving shaped like a bird in mid-flight, wings open wide. "I carved this," he murmured, thumb brushing the grain. "It is for you. For remembering warmth when winter tries to take it." She wasn't ready for the crack of emotion that pierced through her. No one had given her a gift in years, not since her mother passed, not since Elias's rejection carved its bruise inside her. Her hands shook as she received the carving. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Grief and gratitude lived too close inside her chest to separate. As the storm eased, Dakota stood and moved toward the door. "I will come again," he said. "If the winter allows it." She nodded, unable to ask anything more of him, though a small part of her longed to. He stepped outside, closing the door softly behind him, as if careful not to disturb something fragile. Karen pressed her palm to the wooden bird, feeling the shape of hope carved into its wings. The room felt different now, less hollow, less cold. She felt different too, as though a slow light had found its way into the places she kept hidden. That night, she dreamt of warm hands wrapping winter in gentleness. She dreamt of a man who carried storms on his shoulders, yet left warmth everywhere he walked. She dreamt of silence that felt like safety. In the morning when she opened her door, her breath froze, not from the cold, but from the sight before her. Another bundle lay on the snow-covered porch. But this time, the deerskin wrapping bulged with something unexpected. Something soft. Something shaped in a way that made her heart race. Inside, she found clothing. A winter dress. Simple, beautiful, and stitched for someone who deserved to be seen. And within that dress lay the beginning of a truth she wasn't yet ready to name. Dakota Blackloud didn't want her merely to survive the winter. He wanted her to feel alive again. The day Karen finally walked down into Pine Hollow wearing the winter dress Dakota had left for her, she felt something she had not felt in years, like the world was made of air she could breathe instead of burdens she had to carry. The dress, a deep forest green stitched with careful hands, hugged her in a way that made her stand straighter. Her braid hung over her shoulder, tied with a ribbon so soft she kept brushing her fingers over it, as though reminding herself it truly belonged to her. For the first time since she was a child, she felt adorned rather than simply clothed. The townsfolk noticed immediately. Pine Hollow was small, and its gossip traveled faster than snowmelt on warm soil. Mrs. Alder, sweeping the steps outside the dry goods store, paused mid-motion. Her eyes widened, not with judgment but with something like relief. "Well now, don't you look like a Christmas blessing walking through the cold?" she whispered, her breath curling into a soft cloud. Karen murmured her thanks and continued, though she felt several glances prickling the back of her neck. Inside Mercer's general store, the bell chimed above the door, drawing Elias Mercer's gaze. His smile appeared instantly, a reflex polished by years of business, but faltered when he took in the sight of her. He studied the dress too long. His eyes narrowed slightly, calculating, searching for its origin. Karen set her list on the counter, feeling her pulse thrum at the base of her throat like wings beating behind ribs. "That's a fine dress you're wearing," he said finally, a careful tone layered beneath his words. "New?" Her nod was small. "A gift." "From whom?" His voice attempted politeness, but landed like a stone skipping toward cruelty. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The flicker in Elias's eyes said he already knew. In towns like Pine Hollow, mystery didn't exist for long. And Takota's arrival, his visits, his quiet presence, his steady offerings, had become a whispered topic around every hearth. Elias's jaw tightened. "Karen, you must understand how things look. An Apache man visiting you alone. The town has its opinions." She felt her shoulders stiffen, as though winter wind had crept into her bones. "And what are yours?" He busied himself counting her purchases. "I only mean to protect you. People talk. It isn't becoming for a woman." She cut in gently but firmly. "For a woman alone, you mean? A woman you once turned away." His lips pressed into a thin line. "Loneliness has a way of making you accept the wrong sort of attention." She gathered her bags, her voice soft but unshaken. "And pride has a way of making you regret what you never valued. Good day, Elias." When she left, the bell above the door rang like a quiet declaration of independence. Outside, the whispers began almost immediately. Women exchanging glances. Men pretending not to listen. Children pointing when they thought she couldn't see. Beneath every stare lay a question they didn't have the courage to ask aloud. Why would a man like Takota Blackloud care for a woman like her? What had drawn him to her doorstep? What tied their lives together in ways outsiders couldn't understand? Karen didn't have answers, only the fragile beginning of something she wasn't brave enough to name. But she knew one thing. Takota's kindness was real. Solid. Measured. Intentional. He didn't bring her help for show. He didn't leave gifts to claim ownership or attention. His offerings were quiet testaments of a man who believed kindness was a duty, not a transaction. She returned home with cold hands and a trembling heart. Snow began falling in soft spirals around her porch, reminding her of the day he'd first appeared. She ran her fingers over the carved bird on her table, its wings forever reaching upward. Somehow, the simple carving felt like a promise, one she didn't yet understand but found herself wanting to believe in. When Takota returned that evening, the sky already fading to silver twilight, she stepped outside before he could knock. He paused, breath forming clouds, eyes taking her in with a stillness that made her feel rooted and unsteady all at once. "The dress," he murmured, voice low as distant thunder. "It suits you." She felt warmth rise to her cheeks. "Thank you." Town noticed. His jaw tensed. People judge what they don't understand. She hesitated before speaking again. Elias Mercer had things to say. Takota's eyes darkened, though his tone remained calm. "What did he want from you?" She shook her head. "To warn me. To make me doubt you." A long silence settled. Heavy but not suffocating. A silence that asked her to decide whether to trust the path she had stepped onto, or retreat into the safety of old loneliness. She lifted her gaze. "I don't doubt you." The air shifted. Even the snow seemed to fall more softly. Takota looked toward the valley, the ridge, the distant stretch of his people's land. Then back to her. "I brought something more today." He handed her a bundle wrapped in doeskin. When she opened it, her breath caught again. Inside lay a cloak of soft winter fur, stitched with intricate beadwork in muted reds and sky blues. Not flashy. Not loud. Beautiful in a quiet way, the way she was. "For Christmas," he said gently, "you should have warmth that honors you." Her eyes stung. "You don't have to give me anything more." "But I want to." His voice softened, like a man stepping into a truth he hadn't yet admitted. "You deserve to feel seen." Seen. The word broke something fragile inside her, something she'd kept bound beneath years of silence. She clutched the cloak to her chest, unable to speak. Dakota stepped back slightly, as though unsure whether he had crossed a line he never meant to. The sky behind him deepened into indigo blues, the edges of night pressing closer. His breath formed slow clouds as he added, "There will be more. Before Christmas Day, I will bring you the last of what I promised." She frowned lightly, though not in confusion, more in wonder. "You promised me something?" He nodded once. "When winter began. When I first saw you." Her heart trembled, not from fear but from the dawning realization that his visits were not small, scattered acts of kindness. They were threads woven with intention. "What more could you bring me?" His expression shifted. Quiet, thoughtful, weighted with something unspoken. Something she sensed he had been carrying long before she entered his days. His voice lowered, as though the truth was not yet ready to emerge into the cold air. "Something you deserve. Something long overdue." Her breath caught. Dakota looked at her, as though memorizing her silhouette against the falling snow. As though committing her to a place inside him he didn't yet have the language to name. Karen took a step closer, heart steady in a way it had never been before. "Then tell me, what is it you intend to give me?" He inhaled, deep and slow, the kind of breath a man takes before speaking truths that cannot be undone. His eyes held hers with a certainty that sent warmth up her spine. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "I will return. And when I do, you will understand everything." The wind fell silent. The snow paused midair. And Karen, standing there in her new winter cloak with her heart trembling in her chest, realized that whatever he planned to reveal on Christmas Eve would either break her open, or give her back a part of herself she never believed could be returned. Either way, the winter was no longer hers alone. Christmas Eve arrived wrapped in a hush so profound it felt as though the entire valley held its breath. Snow drifted in tender spirals down the hillside, settling along the porch rails like feathers from a sleeping angel. Karen stood by her cabin window, dressed in the cloak Dakota had gifted her, fingers brushing the beadwork as if it were a heartbeat she could hold. Every movement inside her felt fragile and bright. Anticipation, fear, warmth, wonder, threads of emotion too tightly woven to pull apart. She told herself she was merely waiting for an answer, but the truth was far deeper. She was waiting for him. He came just as the sun surrendered its last ember to the horizon. His silhouette emerged first, a dark shape against a world of white, tall and steady and unbelievably certain. Karen stepped outside before he reached the porch, her breath spilling into the cold air in small bursts that neither reached him nor concealed the tremble beneath them. He stopped a few feet away, studying her with that quiet intensity that made her feel seen in ways she had never allowed herself to be seen before. The moment stretched, delicate as frost. Then he exhaled a breath that sounded like a truth resting too heavily inside him. "I have something to tell you," he said, voice low, nearly swallowed by the wind. "Something I should have said sooner. Something I thought I had time to explain." Karen's heart tightened, the tremor of something foreboding threading through her ribs. She nodded, inviting him to continue. But before he could speak, footsteps crunched through the snow behind them. Unsteady, rushed, belonging to someone who arrived not with gentleness, but with purpose sharpened into anger. Elias Mercer emerged from the shadows of the pines, face bright with cold and resentment, breath sharp with unspoken accusations. He stopped a short distance away, glaring first at Dakota, then at her, as though their nearness offended him. "I knew I'd find you here," Elias spat, eyes narrowing on the cloak draped around her shoulders. "The whole town's talking, Karen. They say you've let yourself be taken in by him. That you've forgotten what this valley expects from its women." Dakota stiffened, but he didn't move. His stillness was a warning. Karen felt her chest fill with heat, anger, shame, hurt, defiance, all braided together. Elias took another step, as if proximity might grant him authority. "You don't know this man. You don't know what his intentions are. You're being foolish. Reckless. Everyone sees it but you." Karen's voice rose with a strength she barely recognized. "You don't get to speak of what I see. You lost that right the day you made me feel I wasn't worth choosing." Elias flinched, pride bleeding beneath his expression, but stubbornness pushed him forward. I'm trying to save you from being ruined. He isn't like us. He can't give you a future. Dakota finally spoke, his voice a low rumble that settled in the snow like a stone dropped into water. You do not speak for her. And you do not decide her future. Elias scoffed, but fear flickered behind the sound. You think helping her makes you worthy? You think walking around like some silent savior gives you a claim to her? Dakota took one quiet step forward, not threatening, simply undeniable. I have claimed nothing. But I will not let you speak to her, as if she is incapable of choosing what her heart deserves. Karen felt the air squeeze between them, tension crackling like firewood on the verge of catching flame. She moved between the men, placing a hand against Dakota's chest, grounding him, grounding herself. Enough, she whispered. This isn't why you came. Please, tell me what you needed to say. Elias shook his head, disbelief twisting his words. You'd choose him over safety? Over propriety? Over everything this town expects? Karen turned to him, voice softer than snow yet sharper than truth. I would choose kindness. I would choose the one who sees me, not the one who measures me against his expectations. The final ember of pride in Elias's eyes sputtered, and without another word, he turned and disappeared into the darkening woods, leaving only the echo of broken arrogance behind. For a moment, silence reclaimed the night. Then Dakota stepped back, gaze dropping, as though Elias's presence had forced him into admitting something he had hoped to carry more gently. There is something you must hear, he said slowly. Something that cannot come softly. My people have called for me. A summons. A responsibility I cannot refuse. I must leave at dawn. The words pierced her like ice cracking through the heart of a river. She blinked once, twice, as if her mind needed time to understand the shape of his absence. Leaving? Tomorrow? Christmas Day? The world tilted slightly, though the snow beneath her boots remained still. She swallowed against the ache rising through her, an ache so sharp it stole the warmth from her hands. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Dakota's voice deepened with regret, thick and quiet. Because I did not know how. Because every time I came to your door, I found reasons to stay a little longer. Because something in your silence made me believe winter could be gentler if I walked it beside you. Her breath trembled, forming a fragile ghost in the air between them. Then why bring me gifts? Why ask me to trust you? Why warm my life only to walk away? His answer came slow, each word carrying the weight of a man torn between duty and desire. Because you deserved warmth even if I could not stay to give it. Because I wanted you to remember that winter did not defeat you. And because you became something I never expected to carry into my heart. Her pulse stuttered. The world dimmed at the edges. Something inside her felt pulled in two directions, toward him, and away from the pain of losing him. She forced herself to speak, though her voice fractured. If I ask you not to go, will you stay? Pain washed across his face, raw and unhidden. I cannot choose my heart over my people. Not even for... He stopped himself, breath shaking. Not even for what? She whispered. The wind paused, waiting. Dakota looked at her, as though she were both the storm and the shelter he had spent years searching for. His voice dropped to a bare whisper. Not even for the woman who became the reason winter felt less cruel. Tears blurred her vision, hot against the cold. Then go, she said, stepping back even though every part of her reached for him. Go before I ask again. Before I break both of us with something neither of us is ready to name. Dakota bowed his head, sorrow heavy in the movement. He turned away, each step an unraveling thread pulled from the cloth they had begun weaving together. Snow swallowed his footprints before her tears reached the earth. Karen stood on the porch long after he vanished into the dark, cloak wrapped tightly around her, as though she could keep the echo of him close a little longer. The carved bird pressed against her palm, wings open in a flight she suddenly understood too deeply. She whispered into the cold night, voice barely a breath. If he leaves at dawn, will he ever return? And from somewhere beyond the ridge, carried on a wind older than longing, came a single distant sound. A soft, solitary drumbeat. A summons for him. A warning for her. A promise that nothing would ever be the same again. Christmas morning rose pale and shivering, the sky washed in muted gold that barely touched the snow-covered hills. Karen had not slept. She sat by the dying embers of her fire, cloak wrapped tight, the carved wooden bird resting in her palm like a heartbeat she could feel but not quiet. She told herself this day would pass like any other winter morning, that she had survived loneliness before and could do it again. But memory was a heavy thing, and Takota's absence pressed against her chest like a stone she could not lift. Outside, the world waited in stillness as though listening to her sorrow. She stepped onto the porch just as the sun crept over the ridge. The cold struck her skin like a truth she wasn't ready for. She looked toward the distant path he had taken, and whispered a farewell the wind stole before it reached the trees. The valley stood silent, unbroken, a white canvas untouched by footsteps. Takota was gone. Duty had taken him, pulling him back into a world where she had no place. She tried to steady herself, anchoring to the strength she had built over years of solitude. But today even her strength felt brittle. She returned inside, stoking the fire with trembling hands. She told herself she would carry on, that the gifts he'd given her were enough, that some men came into a life only long enough to prove that winter didn't own the entire horizon. Yet every corner of her cabin held the echo of him, his voice, his stillness, the warmth he left in places where cold had lived too long. The quiet he had once softened now felt louder than ever. As she laid another log on the fire, a sudden sound cracked through the dawn. A distant thunder of hooves, steady and approaching fast. Her breath halted. She turned toward the door, heart racing with an impossible hope she refused to name. The sound grew louder, heavy hoofbeats pounding a rhythm she felt in her bones. She ran to the window, pulling back the curtain with shaking fingers. A lone horse cut through the snow, mane flying like a banner. And on its back, strong, unbroken, unmistakable, was Takota. Her knees weakened. She pressed a hand to her mouth, disbelief and relief flooding her like sudden spring water. Before she could think, she burst out the door, boots sinking into the fresh snow. Takota pulled his horse to a halt, breath rising in white bursts, hair wild from the wind. He dismounted with a speed that spoke not of grace but urgency, as if any delay might shatter something fragile between them. Karen felt tears blur the world. "You left," she whispered, voice cracking. "You said you had to go." He stepped closer, snow crunching beneath his weight. "I did," he answered softly. "But the farther I rode, the more something inside me pulled me back. My people will always need me. But today," he paused, searching for breath. "Today, someone else needed me more." She shook her head, overwhelmed. "Why come back? What changed?" Takota looked at her, as though the truth had lived inside him for far longer than he had known. "Because I realized something as the sun rose behind the ridge. Something I could no longer carry in silence." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small pouch tied with a dark cord. "I meant to give you this before I left. But fear kept me from speaking. Fear that I would bind you to a path you did not choose." Her pulse raced. "What path?" He took her hands, rough palms warm even in the bitter cold. "A path beside me. A life shaped by shared winters, not separate ones. A world where your silence is not loneliness but peace. A world where I am not only a visitor at your door, but the man who walks beside you." Her breath caught. Takota stepped nearer until their foreheads almost touched, his voice soft as falling snow. "Karen Whitford, when I walked away from your cabin last night, I knew I carried your sorrow with me. And when I reached the ridge, I knew I carried something more, your heart pressed against my own. I could not leave it behind. I could not leave you behind." Tears slipped down her cheeks, warm trails against the cold. "And what is it you want from me?" she whispered. He lifted her hands to his chest, placing them over his heartbeat. "Nothing you do not freely give. But I must speak this truth before the winter steals the courage from my tongue." His voice trembled, rich with emotion. "I love you, Karen. Not with haste. Not with hunger. With the quiet certainty of a man who has walked many hard paths and finally found the one he was meant for." The world stilled. Even the wind seemed to pause. Karen closed her eyes, letting his words settle into every hollow place inside her, filling spaces she had believed would remain empty forever. She felt his heartbeat beneath her palms, strong, steady, real. When she opened her eyes, her voice trembled, yet it held a strength she had found only through knowing him. I was afraid to hope for you, Dakota. Afraid that wanting you meant losing the strength I built alone. But you didn't take anything from me. You gave me back what loneliness had stolen. His eyes softened, narrowing with emotion, as though her words reached places inside him untouched by years of battle or hardship. Then say it, he murmured. If your heart speaks the same truth as mine, let me hear it. Karen stepped into him fully, her forehead resting against his. I love you, she said, voice breaking with relief. I have for longer than I admitted. I love you, Dakota Blackloud. He exhaled a breath that sounded like the end of a long journey. His arms wrapped around her, lifting her slightly off the snow, holding her as though claiming her not from the world, but from the shadows she had lived in too long. She clung to him, feeling the warmth of his chest, the strength of his embrace, the promise pulsing between them like a drumbeat of destiny. When he finally set her down, he opened the small pouch he'd carried. Inside lay a bracelet of braided leather threaded with polished stones, Apache colors, his colors. He tied it gently around her wrist. This is my promise, he whispered. Wherever I go, my path leads back to you. She touched the bracelet, breath unsteady. And mine leads to you. Snow began to fall again, soft and shimmering around them. Dakota took her hand, guiding her toward the cabin where warmth waited. Today, he said softly, I do not ride away. Today, I come home. And as they stepped inside together, winter no longer felt like something to survive. It felt like the beginning of everything.